We are live already. So welcome everyone to this second Dementia Australia webinar in regards to the application to the Dementia Australia Research Foundation grant that has just been announced very recently. I'm just going to do a bit of a share of my screen. Let's see if I don't mess this up. Can everyone see my screen? Can everyone say if they can see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet.
See a desktop.
A desktop, but you can see the screen.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
There we go. Okay, so just some slides to introduce. I'm not going to take a lot of time. Oh gosh. How do I do full screen here? Oh, it's fine. I'm not taking a lot of time because I don't want to, I want to leave the panelists to introduce themselves. The purpose of the webinar today, as it was outlined on the image that we sent around, is to provide applicants with a strategic advice on how to apply for the new program of Dementia Australia. We have assembled a great panel today of people that have different roles and different expertise and have been involved in different capacities in the process of reviewing grants or outlining the different grant programs. Some of the people we have today have also been awarded grants very recently. So they are in a very unique position to be able to provide prospective applicants with feedback. What are the type of things that work out for them. We have people that have been awarded grants for biological projects or clinical projects. And for those of you that have read the guidelines that are interested in applying or that might have been applying before, you know that Dementia Australia has a very strong focus in involving people with a lived experience of dementia. So we have two members of the LEAP panel who also have been involved in reviewing applications. And this is a criteria that is very important for these particular grants. So as I said, this is not about compliance, it's more about strategic advice. So the idea is that you walk out from this webinar with like a better idea of how to angle your application, what is the best program for you to apply for. The grants are closing in 6 weeks, around 6 weeks from now. So it's quite a lot of time to prepare the application. So I would encourage you to start thinking about it if you haven't done so already. The way we are going to organize the seminar today, I'm going to perhaps just bring the program. The first hour, we will have a number of presentations of different people. So each of the panels will have about 10 minutes, talk about the different roles and the different advice. And then that will go for 1 hour from 12 to around 1 p.m. And then from that point onwards, we're going to open the questions and the questions and answers. So for all the members of the audience, if you have specific questions, you can put them on the chat. I think that people can also promote questions. So I will be doing my best to put the questions aside and organize everything. And on the second hour of the webinar, I will open the floor to the panelists and we'll have a conversation about and try to answer the most significant questions that people might have had. So with that, I'm going to stop talking because I'm not the interesting person today. And I'm going to close and stop sharing. There we are. And I'm going to ask Annette Moxie, manager of Dementia Australia, who's on the call. Annette, if you're ready, you can start. The floor is yours.
Sorry, the ability to share my screen and start the PowerPoint presentation is covered up by all these Zoom features. So I'm just trying to move all of those. So there we go. Okay, can you? Oh no, is it coming up as a slide notes or is it?
I had the same issue as well. It seems that we can only see the present.
There we go. So that should be all good, I hope.
Now,
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for asking me to present today. It's an absolute pleasure to talk about our 2022 Dementia Grants program. This year, we've got almost $3 million on offer, which is a really great outcome considering how difficult the economic environment is at the moment. And we wouldn't be able to do what we do without the support of donors and our partners. So today, there we go. Today, I'd like to talk about just briefly what the objectives are of the Dementia Australia Research Foundation, outline some of the grants that are available in the 2023 program this year, and also a few things to know, including some things that have changed from previous years. We've got a fairly standard program, but every now and again, something different will come along. So basically, we fund researchers across all the different stages of their career, but we maintain a particular focus on supporting early and mid-career researchers and attracting, talented new researchers into the field. It's hoped by doing that we attract them to dementia research, we retain them, and then they'll go on and find some amazing breakthroughs, including possibility of a cure. We also do what we can to promote the translation of research effectively in the real world so that the research actually has a positive impact on those that it's meant to impact, which is people living with dementia, their families and carers. And from that, we also encourage that people living with dementia, families and carers are involved in a meaningful way throughout the whole research process. We have a very broad spectrum of research that we promote, and I've listed some of those there. So we look at anything from the biomedical lab-based work, looking at causes and mechanisms of the disease, all the way through to care-based research. So we look at, reducing risk, developing treatments, diagnosis, and also increasing awareness of dementia as well, and how it impacts people. So for 2023, we've got a range of programs available. We've got project grants, postdoctoral fellowships, mid-career fellowships, and new this year, it's made a comeback. We used to fund them some time ago, so it's great to see we've got travel grants, and also with a new collaboration with the Dr. Bonnie and Stuart Bartle, we're able to offer a research translation grant this year. So what do these entail? So firstly, we've got project grants. So they're sort of smaller pilot work type of grants to support people who want to establish their career in research and get that pilot work to get their track record going. We've got 10 awards available. And again, they can be anything from the biomedical lab-based work all the way through to psychosocial. The criteria is up to 6-year post-PhD, and we've got a couple of specific awards which are named there, and that's just to cover care-based research and also risk reduction as well. They're worth $75,000 over 1 to 2 years. We also have some postdoctoral fellowships, and so this is also aimed to attract, talented early career researchers who have completed their PhD and in the last 6 years to the field of dementia research, and give them an opportunity to fast track their career into becoming independent researchers. So we've got 2 fellowships available this year. The starting salary is $114,000 per annum. And there's also some research expenses that we cover as well. If your salary is above that amount, then you'll need to source that from your university or other funding bodies. But the thing to note here is that the Dementia Australia Research Foundation Fellowship is to be the primary award. So you can't use our fellowship to, say, top up an NHMRC investigator grant. We may be applying indexation to salaries each year for successful researchers as well, but we can communicate that with you at the time of the award. One award will be offered through the Race Against Dementia and our partnership with them. This year, their award is going to be for 5 years, so it's a very prestigious award. And it's a great opportunity. It offers mentoring through Formula One experts, as well as other research experts internationally. And the fellows can come together and meet all the fellows from all around the world that are supported through this program, meet annually to share their ideas and their research. So it's something to really consider. They have more of a focus on the biomedical end of things with treatment and prevention and clinical type of research. And there's also $125,000 worth in research expenses for that one. Just to note as well that people who are eligible for a postdoctoral fellowship are probably also eligible for a project grant. But what we ask you to do, if you would like to apply for both, just make sure that you submit 2 applications. A fellowship application won't automatically be considered for a postdoc. And if you happen to be successful and both awarded, you'll have the opportunity to choose between which one you would like, because only one award can be held. We also have mid-career research fellowships. So they again is to support researchers who have completed their PhD, but within the last 10 years. And we're hoping that that'll continue their trajectory on becoming leaders in the research field and allowing them to establish their own research programs. There are 2 fellowships available, each providing a salary of $151,000 a year over 2 years. And there's a research grant of $75,000 attached to that. And once again, if your salary is above that, you'll need to work that shortfall out with your university or through other grants that you might have. And indexation, again, may be applied to salary. So these fellowships aren't restricted to any one particular area of research. Again, with the foundation, we support everything from the lab right through to care. There is one award that will be sponsored this year by the Royce Simmons Foundation, and he has a particular interest in more the biomedical and clinical side of things. So as I mentioned, we have travel grants that have made a comeback into the field. So these haven't been awarded for a while, and I think with the fact that COVID has coming to an end, we think anyway, we travel anyway. Travel's opened up, borders have opened up. We thought this would be a good opportunity for people to be able to travel again and meet each other and get those collaborations up and running. So they're worth $15,000 each. We've got 4 available. And this one, we're happy for PhD students to apply. So as long as you've got your first year of confirmation under your belt, and you have no more than 10 years post-PhD experience, we're happy to receive an application from you. So these awards are to assist researchers to travel nationally and internationally to learn new techniques, build new networks, get to know some well-known teams that might be in the field, and also to build your expertise and build your knowledge and your skills and promote networking, all those sorts of things that you can do that is really good through travel. So you could, in this application, you could include things like attending scientific events, meetings, doing some skill-based workshops, or also, meeting with researchers in different labs, that sort of thing. And with the travel grants, you can hold this one in conjunction with others. So if you're submitting a project grant, for example, you can also submit a travel grant on top of that. And finally, we have the Dr. Stewart and Bonnie Bartle Research Translation Grants. And they've got a care-based focus. That's really an area they're really interested in, supporting families, supporting carers, and improving the care that people living with dementia receive. And they're also interested in moving all that experimental work and pilot work that's been done and actually evaluating that in the real world and seeing what are the barriers, how does this work, is it even effective, and trying to actually move evidence through that pathway into practice. So they're valued at $175,000 and they can be used over 2 to 3 years. So just to note with this one, that there's a separate application process. We've got a separate form because there's a few elements that are slightly different to our usual grant round. For example, we've allowed space for 10 investigators to be included. As I think that's important because with a translational type of grant, you're going to collaborate with various stakeholders from industry or implementation science experts and other stakeholders. So you may wish to include mention of those on your application. So there's just a few tiny things that are a bit different from the others, but there's its own link to the application for that one. And with this one too, the CIA, the first lead chief investigator, should not have more than 10 years post-PhD experience. So some little things to know, because we have made a few tweaks. Each year we review everyone's feedback and we discuss with the scientific panel, and we make tweaks based on what's happening in the space. So unlike previous years, we're now asking that a 2-page career summary be uploaded onto the website instead of the 10-page CV. So this provides you with an opportunity to showcase your career impact and the importance of your top publications. Dementia research is a small but growing field, so it's important that conflicts of interest is managed and that the review process is as free of bias as it can be possible. So ensure that we provide the best possible review. We do ask that applications, mainly the research proposal and a few other sections of the application, are de-identified and don't include information that would reveal you or your institution in the application. So we do provide some tips on how to do that in the information for applicants booklet, so please check that out. For example, you wouldn't include your name and affiliation in the header or footer of your application, for example. There are places though in the application where you can reveal that information, such as the knowledge translation section, and also the roles of all the different researchers will play on your application. And for fellows, there is a career progression section, so you can, talk about all your secondments or other teams and your own career in that section as well. But rest assured that even though that the research proposal is reviewed separately, as it moves through the application process and the review process, it will be married back up with your career progression and track record and that sort of thing. So it'll all be reviewed in totality in the end. So since 2014, it's been really great that we've had people living with dementia or people who are former carers or currently caring for people with dementia who are members of our scientific panel. And it has been outlined in our information for applicants booklet, but it's important to note that they review a number of sections of your application, including lay summary, knowledge translation, the implications, and also how you're involving people living with dementia or carers in your research. So it's really important that those sections are written clearly and concisely, because their scores will go towards the overall score of your application, and they carry a 20% weighting on that. The other thing to note is that the Race Against Dementia Fellowship applicants, they always complete an interview, and that's with us as well as representatives from Race Against Dementia. But just to keep in mind that the top ranked other fellowships for the other schemes, and including the mid-career fellows, may be invited to complete an interview if their scores are quite competitive and quite similar, because sometimes we get so many great projects and we can't fund all of them. So, we might have to go to that extra step to do an interview to decide who's the successful recipient on that occasion. So just keep that in mind. You will be informed ahead of time and given a couple of weeks to prepare a short presentation and answer a few questions. So finally, my other extra tips for applying to our grant round this year, I've just outlined there the process. There's the link to our portal. First thing is, make sure you go through the information for applicants booklet, because there's actually quite a lot of tips and hints in there and links to how to write a lay summary and how to access resources on knowledge translation, so they can be quite useful when preparing your application. Also start the online application early and make sure that you can get in, because we don't want people who are logging in at 5 o'clock on the day of submission and you have technical problems and, you know, we can't, we might find it difficult to help you in time. So yeah, make sure you log in and you've got your email address in without any spaces or typos, so that you're able to submit. And then we can, if there's any technical problems, just get in touch and we'll sort them out for you. There's also a Word template on our website, so you can work on your application offline if you like, and then copy the relevant sections into the web form when you're ready. If you're applying for multiple awards, just make sure that you enter all your details for one first, then submit it, and then you'll be able to go in and start the next application. So that's all from me. Thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing all your applications when they come through in August. If you have any queries, just please feel free to reach out. That's our email there, and we'll be more than happy to help.
Beautiful. Thank you, Annette. It is really a really packed program this year. I think I've never seen so many grants actually available in Dementia Australia since I've been checking.
Yeah, we've got lots of variety this year, so.
Excellent. Okay, so we're just gonna pass them to the next presentations. Just for the people that just joined, I already seen some questions popping out on the question and answer panel. So as I said before, the first half will be speakers talking about, you know, the topic for 10 minutes each. The second hour will open the floor to questions and answers. So please add all your questions in the Q&A button there, and I'll do my best to kind of like put them together and pass them on later to the speakers. So with that, I want to invite Dr. Jane Thompson and Mr. Anne Pietsch, which are our next speakers of the LEAP panel. I have your slides. Jane, do you want me to share the screen already?
In a sec, I'll just tell you when to start, okay?
Tell me what to do.
All right, so off I go then. Okay, so well, thank you very much for the opportunity for Anne and I to talk to you today. So as Annette mentioned, the involvement of people impacted by dementia in your research is an important element of your research application. So Anne and I are going to just talk to you a little bit about that. So I'm speaking as a former carer. My husband died of Alzheimer's disease in 2007, and I was a member of the Dementia Australian Research Foundation scientific panel from 2014 to 2019, and I'm also currently a member of the Sydney Dementia Network Lived Experience Expert Advisory Panel. And I've been involved in dementia research at the program, project and organisational level actually since about 2010. So I thought it might be useful if you can put up the slides, Ramon, just to offer a few tips about how you might meaningfully involve people impacted by dementia in your research. And I'm going to, can you get that on full screen? Yeah. I think they're coming up. And then, so I'm going to, just offer you a few tips, and then Anne is going to talk more specifically about the experience of being a reviewer on the scientific panel. Can you make them full screen so you don't see them all at once, Ramon, or not?
Sorry, give me a second. I have 3 screens. So I got the.
That's okay. Anyway, look.
Anywhere.
So the first thing I wanted to mention, and I probably don't really need to explain these, but often people use the terms engagement, participation, and involvement quite loosely and interchangeably. But in this context, they actually have quite specific meanings. So I'm just a word of advice to actually be clear that you know what you mean when you're using these terms. So engagement in research is really about researchers raising awareness of research, sharing knowledge, or engaging or creating a dialogue with the public. Participation refers to somebody being a participant in a research study. And this is quite different from what we mean by involvement in research. So involvement actually means people with the relevant experience partnering with researchers and contributing to how that research is designed, conducted, and disseminated. So the research is carried out with or by people with that direct or indirect experience of a disease or health condition, rather than to, for, or about them. So we are talking about genuine involvement in research here. Having said that, if you read some of the literature around public involvement in research, you'll see that people use these terms a little bit differently in different countries. So in Canada, for instance, they use engagement when we would use involvement. So just beware of that. So the next slide. You actually need in your application to demonstrate to the Research Foundation that you are genuinely going to involve the people impacted by dementia as contributors to or partners in your research, and demonstrate that you are going to value their contribution. And if you've got among your investigators or can work with someone who's had some experience in public involvement in research, then that's great, but it's not necessary. Everyone has to start somewhere. But I often find in applications, people will make vague and meaningless statements, and I'd urge you not to do this. So for instance, they will say people impacted by dementia will be involved in all stages of the project, and that's it. So we need a lot more than that. You need to actually say how they will be involved. And I really like these 3 principles, which are really gleaned from the UK, from the National Institute for Health Research, have some fairly good guidance about public involvement in research. And I think if you follow these principles, that will help you. So firstly, you need to involve the right people. So you have to involve the people who are most relevant and appropriate to your study. So this might mean people with a diagnosis of dementia, mild cognitive impairment. It might be people at risk of dementia. It might be carers or care partners, or people who describe themselves as advocates. In some cases, depending on what your research focus is, it might be members of the general public who don't have experience of whatever is being researched, for example, in, say, risk reduction or population-based studies. And this, of course, raises the question, how do you find the right people to involve? Well, you may already have a relationship with appropriate people, and you can build on that. You can seek examples from other researchers as to how they've approached this, or ask them to connect you with relevant people. You might know someone who impacted by dementia who's got experience previously of involvement in research, and someone that you've worked with already. So you can also use them to connect you with other people. You can use Dementia Australia. They're happy to connect you through their Dementia Advocates program to people who might be interested in being involved. And then we have the Sydney Dementia Network Lived Experience Expert Advisory Panel. So it's a good idea to present your research to the panel, and maybe some members will be interested in having a greater and more specific involvement in your work. But you also need to think about how you're going to select the people to be involved. So you're going to advertise, seek expressions of interest, and then how will you decide if the applicants are a good fit? So putting all that sort of detail into your application is really important. And you also need to think about accessibility, diversity, and inclusion issues. So how will you try and involve the people who reflect the diversity of backgrounds and experiences that, say, you expect your potential research participants or the people who are likely to benefit from your research to have? And also you need to think about how you're going to work with people as inclusively as possible, and particularly if you're involving people with cognitive difficulties, how are you going to support them to be involved? So it's important to think about that and say how you're going to do that. And then the second principle is you need to involve enough people. So enough people should be involved to provide at least a reasonable breadth and depth of views on the issues that are likely to be important to the participants that the study might aim to recruit, or who will be intended to benefit from your research. And the right number of people probably depends on the scope of the study, but it's always important to have more than one person. So one person is unlikely to be able to represent the needs and perspectives of an entire group of people, and it might be unfair to ask one person to take on that responsibility. You might want someone who has a bit of experience as a lead person, who might be listed as perhaps an associate investigator on the grant application. And you might also want to set up a small advisory group of people with lived experience. And not everyone involved has to be involved in the same way. So there's a range of possibilities with different people involved on different tasks, or some people being members perhaps of the more formally of the project team. And when you're deciding how many people to involve in your research, you have to think about how many people you can actually manage to be involved well. So it actually does take a bit of work, but it has to be practical and it has to be feasible. And then the third principle is involve those people enough. So this will be different for different types of research. There's no one size fits all, and relevant people should be involved in as many aspects of the study as is feasible, productive, and appropriate to the research and at the right times. So ideally you would involve people at the earliest stages possible, so that ideally before the research begins. This is perhaps a little bit harder, but perhaps in deciding on the research topic and in preparing the grant proposal. They should also be involved throughout the research and also think about how they might be involved at the end of the research in the dissemination. I won't go into what they might do at each stage here, because there are plenty of resources that you can access to find more information about this. So importantly, though, you need to plan for the involvement from the beginning of your project and for how and when you'll communicate with the people you're working with. And it might be helpful to have a nominated contact person on the research team with whom the involved people can keep in touch. And all of this applies to laboratory-based basic science research too. So involving people impacted by dementia is just as important in this type of research. For researchers who may not have direct contact with people with dementia or their care partners and families, or be involved in the direct delivery of healthcare. So there are some really good examples of buddy pairs between basic science researchers and people impacted by dementia. There are also examples of ways in which people can be involved in priority setting exercises, which have generated questions from patients and families that they want basic science research to address. And biomedical researchers say that involvement brings focus and context to their research, and it provides good practice for their lay communication skills, opens up public engagement channels, and emphasises the reasons why they're doing the research in the first place. And some researchers might assume that people may be put off engaging with or getting involved in basic science research, but this is generally not true, with members of the public are often keen to engage with research at the basic fundamental level. And just lastly, a point about payment. Ideally, you will have a budget to cover any costs associated with involvement, and even better, be able to provide at least some remuneration for the involvement of people in your research. And there's good guidance available on this, and there's probably a link, I expect, in the guidance from Dementia Australia. Importantly, you also need to check your university policy and processes for paying such honorariums to volunteers, because this can often be a difficult process administratively. So my next slide is tip number 3. I just wanted to throw this in because I'm getting exhausted by all these co-words which are appearing in the literature. And there's a plethora of these words in relation to the methods by which researchers partner with people impacted by their research. And there are a range of current definitions, especially for co-design and co-production. And I'd recommend, if you're going to use these terms, please explain what you mean by the term and what it means in practice in your research. So you don't just say, we will co-design with people impacted by dementia, or we will use co-design principles. You need to explain what you mean. And also, don't use the term if it isn't really applicable. So not all involvement is co-design, and nor does it have to be. And the last tip, the next slide. So there is this plenty of guidance available out there for you to use. The Dementia Centre for Research Collaboration, and I was involved in produced this guidance for researchers. I'm happy to provide that as a PDF if people can't access it, because I have to say I found a little bit of difficulty trying to find where it's actually located out there on the web, but certainly there is plenty of guidance out there for you to refer to for further information. So thank you. So Anne's going to talk now about her experience as a current reviewer on the scientific panel. Thanks, Anne.
Thanks, Jane. And just to let you know that I'm living with dementia, and I've been a dementia advocate for nearly 10 years. I'm a member of the Dementia Australia Advisory Committee. I'm on the ADNET steering committee, and I'm on all sorts of bits and pieces, but a lot to do with research with different universities and things as well. So, and I am a member of the Sydney Lived Experience Expert Advisory Committee. And so Jane's given you all the nitty gritties, and I'll tell you what it's like from my point of view as a person looking at proposals from an advocate's perspective and as a person living with dementia. But I mean, really and truly, it's not rocket science. You're almost given 20% of your application by just attending to why you should be involving people with a lived experience or living experience. So if you look in your draft information for applicants guidelines, there's set out quite clearly how you can involve people like us and why you should be. From my point of view, I've been involved in doing a lot of DARF application research, looking at DARF research applications, and the good proposals stand out, but it's really easy to see the ones that aren't good, and they're usually the ones that are poorly written, and I can't understand them, so there's no point. I mean, I try, but if you've written it in a proper plain English language that I can understand the lay summary, if I can understand it, I'll get the feeling that you know what you're doing. And if I can't understand that, you know, I don't understand it, others aren't going to understand it either. And also use the appropriate language. Dementia Australia has guidelines on the appropriate language to use when you're talking about people living with dementia. I need to know that you're committed to undertaking the research and that your research is going to have a positive impact on the person living with dementia or their carers. I need to know that you respect me and respect people with dementia. I need to believe that your research is understandable, meaningful, and will benefit people with the lived experience of dementia. And you must show that you've included people living with dementia with a lived experience, either as a carer or as a person living with dementia. Jane has given you all the facts and figures and the theory of it all, but it really needs to be shown that you know who you're talking to. There are many forms of involving people with a lived experience. And as Jane said, it's probably best if you can start from the onset of your research proposal, involve people then. We can, advise on whether the research is going to be of any use. I mean, you might think it's fantastic, but is it going to help people in the end? Is it understandable? And as a person living with dementia or an advocate, we can look at your brochures and things like that and help you put them into plain English so that surveys and any other material to be used by the people that you're speaking to are understandable, so that people are going to understand what you're talking about. Invite advocates to visit you in your lab, and we'll, if it's a lab-based research, and just explain what you're doing and why. I mean, so many people say, but my research is done in a lab and it doesn't need to involve people living with dementia, but it really does. And it's so helpful because then you get to meet people like myself who are going to benefit from your research. It makes it meaningful. And also, we can help with you throughout your whole research by just touching base and making sure that you're still on track and that you still know who I am. And remember, if if you think you know all about dementia and you know somebody with dementia, that means you know one person with dementia, and that there are no two people are the same. And really just show some real commitment about how it's going to be meaningful, how it's going to be translationable. Is it going to continue after you've actually finished your research? Will it carry on and be useful for people living with dementia? And so I suppose if you want, the areas of research that are important to me are all based around the things that have been said before. And I've mentioned some, and Jane too. But cure is always something. Timely diagnosis and support, quality care, help to decrease the stigma of dementia. What about the usage of drugs with dementia? But now there are new drugs around and research is going into those. And don't forget childhood dementia too, which is now becoming more evident. I suppose too, what's in it for me? Why do I do this? I do it because I meet some amazing people. I get to meet amazing researchers and people who care so much about what my life or somebody like me could, benefit from. And it's a really enabling thing. And I'm always treated with great respect, which is always a lovely thing too. And to feel you're part of something so important. And Jane, I think, mentioned that if you want people to help as an advocate, Dementia Australia has got you can request a dementia advocate from them. And also, just don't forget the dementia language guidelines too. I think that's probably all the things that I can think of that are meaningful. But don't forget, really pay some sort of attention to why you want to use somebody living with dementia, why it's important. It's important because you're getting a Dementia Australia grant, but it's important because I'm going to benefit from the research that you come up with. And it's just been fantastic to meet people that have been awarded grants in the past, and to work with Annette and her team's lovely too. And there was a terrific webinar yesterday that really stressed the wealth of knowledge that you can get by using somebody with a lived experience. And I think you should try and get hold of that, because that was really all about advocates. And so advocates are really very important. And we're there to be asked, we're there to help you. And I hope you do really well with all your applications. But read the applicant guideline book, because it's terribly important. And I think that's all. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Jane. That was a great presentation. I think it really underscores the importance of the experience of people living with dementia in this particular grant application. So for people that have never applied to this particular funding round or funding scheme, I would really encourage you to check the guidelines, as they have outlined very well that it's a very significant part of the success of your application. I'm going to move ahead. Just in the interest of time, I will ask the next speakers if they can kind of like keep the time of the presentation short, because I would really like to enable as much time for discussion as possible beyond the presentations. For people that have joined halfway through, please keep putting your questions. I think that the Q&A chat is getting populated. I'm doing my best to organize everything, and we'll be addressing these questions at the end of the presentations. And with that, I would like to welcome Professor Olivier Piguet, who is going to introduce himself, because he will do that probably better than I would do that. And he's even got some slides prepared for us, so that was absolutely excellent. So thank you, Olivier, and the floor is yours. You're muted, Olivier.
It's only been 3 years I've been using this technology, and I still can't do it. Thank you, Ramon. Can you see my slides? Can someone tell me whether they can see my slide?
Yes, all good.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so thanks for the invitation. I've been on the panel since 2017. So what I was going to do is to give you my impressions of how I feel and what I look for when I read these applications. And also for new applicants, just to give you a little bit of explanation about the process. So these grants will be allocated to various reviewers. So there has been two different panels in the past, one more clinical, one more basic science. I'm on the clinical panel. However, I may be asked to read applications that are not directly to my area of expertise. And that's one of the points I will cover in a minute. So bear that in mind. And also when it comes to the selection process or the ranking, what happens is that it's a two-step process that I will cover a little bit in minutes as well. On the panel, there's, I don't know, on the DAV, Annette will be able to tell us that, but I think there's about 20 people on the panel at the moment. And we usually, on a 3-year term, that can be renewed. So there's always new people coming up on board, and then people stepping down. I guess my first point is really to read the instructions. I think it's basic, but it's important, and it shows when people don't. You really need time to write a good application. You need to understand the instructions. You need to understand what is needed. If you don't take that time, it will show. And for me, as a reviewer, what it's telling me two things: either you don't care about your research, or about us as reviewers and the time we take to review your applications. So, for me, it's a bit of a waste of time for everyone involved if you're in that frame of mind. So don't wait until early August to think about putting in an application. Think about it now. Read the instructions, and read the instructions a few times so you know all the sections that you will need to address. In relation to the research proposal itself, a couple of tips. One is about your language that you use, and I'll come back in the lay sections in a minute. But in the research proposal, so remember that we are knowledgeable in the field of dementia, in the space of dementia, but we may not be experts in your field. So think carefully how you pitch your proposal. Yes, you need to provide information, but avoid complex acronyms that only you and your colleagues will understand. And yep, try to pitch it for someone who may not know about the specific techniques or issue or problems that you want to investigate. Another point is that in your introductions and background, dive right in. We don't need to know how many people with dementia live in Australia. That's the type of information we know. It's a Dementia Australia Research Foundation. So all the reviewers will have this information. However, what we don't know is what is the state of research, what are the gaps and issues that you want to address in your specific fields. So again, it's a matter of finding the right pitch for your background information. Aims, again, going back to the instructions, please tell me what you are going to do and what are your hypotheses or the questions that you want to be tested. I don't want to have to look for them. And the more it's highlighted, the clearer it makes it for me and easy for me to evaluate what you want to do and how you're going to do. Yeah, so the rationales, the objectives, and so on. Make it easy for the reviewers. And signposts, subheadings, fantastic. Address all the questions, but add subheadings. Remember that some of these applications will be read not necessarily at the best of time where I have my full mental power. It can be late in the afternoon or evening, and so you need to make our life as reviewers as easy as possible. Methods, again, follow the path. Take us down your journey. So give us information about, so that we understand what you're doing and why you are doing it, and also tell us that you have the expertise to do that. Because if we don't get that, then that will raise questions about the feasibility of the project. What is also good is, if you tell us that you've thought of plan B or plan C if your original plan A doesn't work. So for me, again, it gives me the reassurance that you thought about the whole project. Budget. One point that not many people think about is, have you thought of co-contributions or in-kind contributions from your institution? So sometimes I see budget that are really up to the max, and you think, well, I'm still not sure they can do that. But often what people don't tell me is that, well, they're actually in the lab where they have all the necessary infrastructure, and that all the reagents or all the freezer or whatever, or the equipment that they need is already available at no cost. So if you include that in your budget, there's also additional information for us to judge the quality of the application. And then AI, I think a point about the AI is make sure that they're right for your proposal. Sometimes I see big names on grant applications, and applicants may think that it's a good idea to put the head of the lab or the institution on the application, but it may not be, because what I want to know is that the person that you put as an AI will in effect be able to give you some support and advice during the life of your project, not in name only. So think about that. In terms of other sections, tips, translation to the real world, yeah, it can be tricky for basic science proposal. But the translation can be proximal or more later in further down the track. So it doesn't need to be necessarily at the end of your proposal. The other one is lay project summary, and we've touched on that a little bit, but think about taxi ride chats. Are you able to convey or to relate to someone who doesn't know anything about your project what you're going to do and how? So yeah, think about when you're in the back of the taxi and someone asks you, hey, what are you doing for a living? And you go, well, actually, I'm in dementia research. Oh yeah, what do you do? And so you have about 15 minutes to explain that in a way that will be understandable. And I would recommend to write your lay summary at the end. So once you've thought about your research and that you know exactly what you want to do. Implication of the research section, don't pretend that you will cure cancer, please. We know that it's not possible. Just be realistic about what you want to do. And Anne and Jane have spoken about this involvement of people with lived experience. Don't wait. Again, it shows when there's the lip service about this aspect. It takes time. Again, you need to think about who you want to involve, how you want to involve, and how often you want to involve these people. There are, as Jane has mentioned, there are a number of resources about how to do that, and make sure that you take the time to do this. Remember the scoring criteria. Again, there'll be two sets of scoring. So we're being asked to rank applications for first round, where half of the applications will will not be considered for final ranking. And then, so it's a score on a 3-point score, and then on the panel there's the different sections. So the sections that are outlined is the application that will be scored out of 6. So make sure that you address all the scoring criteria. And finally, my last point is that if you're applying for a fellowship and a grant, a project grant, don't recycle. There are 2 different things. You might do the same research, but one is for 5 years, the other one is not. And again, it shows when someone's put in a grant application and just thought, oh yes, I'll put in a fellowship application as well, and haven't thought about the scope of the project during that time. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier. That was a very good presentation. It really covered very well the type of things our reviewer we're gonna be looking on, in your application. Olivier is very experienced with this particular grant scheme, but not only that, he's also a very experienced reviewer for NHMSE, ASE, and international grant panels. So I will highly recommend you to take his advice to heart and use those tips to write your application. Please keep putting questions in the chat. We have like about 10 questions already, plus some more. So this is what we want, so we can open the floor later on to address all these outstanding questions. And now we're going to start with we're going to hear from some stories of success, perhaps from previous people that have been awarded grants from Dementia Australia. And I'd like to invite Fiona first. Hi, Fiona. She won a grant. I mean, you can explain this better, but I think your project was a biological kind of like project, which is something that people often have difficulty with when they try to apply to these grant applications. So I'm pretty sure that you can provide some good tips to people that may be thinking about it. Thanks, Fiona.
Thank you. Can you hear me and see my slides?
All good.
Yeah, thanks Ramon and the organising team for this opportunity to share hopefully some tips with you that might be beneficial for putting together the project grant. I wanted to start off by saying that this is my first time applying for a Dementia Australia scheme. And because of that, I think it's really important that you become super familiar with Dementia Australia's mission. And we've heard some of that already today. So basically what I would recommend doing first is background research. Learn everything about the funding organisation. I spent heaps of time on the Dementia Australia website, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about how that helped me put together my project grant. But one of the first things I did was look specifically at Dementia Australia's topic and scope. So I wanted to see where my work aligns with Dementia Australia's mission so that I could write to that, to those missions. So I sort of here thought, okay, I think these 3 sort of fit where my research is, but ultimately I would focus on my research being something that's gaining a better understanding of the causes of dementia. But as you'll see a bit later on, I didn't discount, the other things like providing accurate and timely diagnosis, for example. I was able to build that into my application as sort of things I thought my research could lead to in the future. So the next major point is terminology, and we've heard already from Anne, Jane, Olivier, and Annette that terminology is really important. And it's really important that we understand as applicants that Dementia Australia was founded by advocates. It's targeted at research that will benefit persons impacted and living with dementia. And so because of that, you need to be very respectful and use terminology that's appropriate and really easy to understand. Dementia Australia's website is a fantastic resource for this. And so what I did was I basically trolled the Dementia Australia website, looked at all of the fact sheets, the resources, and built myself on the side here, this terminology library. So all of this terminology comes from Dementia Australia resources. And so I use this terminology library to essentially write both my research proposal and the online portal section of the application. And already in the information for applicants book on page 19, there's some really great links that Dementia Australia provide to help you write in terms. But I really advise that everyone spend the time understanding what Dementia Australia are trying to achieve with these research grants and learning the terminology that's appropriate to be used in the application. So I'm going to talk a lot about the online portal aspect, and that's because I think personally, I knew that I needed to spend the most amount of time on that section. We're all pretty good at putting together research proposals and scientifically kind of like outlaying our work, but I think we all, and I learned this very quickly, need a lot more training or understanding of how to target lay audience and also persons who this research is directly going to affect. So if and when you're successful with a project grant, Dementia Australia have this awesome initiative where they put together a fact sheet about your project. And so I felt like it was easier for me to write the application because I already sort of had thought about my project as a fact sheet. So ask myself these basic questions, what's the focus of my research? Why is it important? How am I going to do it? And how would I explain that to my friend, my mom? What it will mean for dementia research and what it will mean for persons living with dementia. So I think that everyone should go away and sort of maybe even put together a fact sheet of your project before going into the online portal. I found this really beneficial. So also in the online portal, the implications for your research is something that is really important to outline. And again, all of this terminology in the blue here, I took from Dementia Australia Research Foundation page or the Information for Applicants book. So I was using Dementia Australia's terminology to help explain what my project was going to achieve and how I was going to achieve Dementia Australia's missions for research. So again, on page 19 for the Information for Applicants is this section, and the wording is really nice to set up for how you're going to explain the impact and meaningful outcomes of your research. You can see I've got dot points. I actually did do dot points in the online portal. I don't know, it worked really well for me. I didn't plan to do that. I sort of had dot points with the idea that I would write them out more in structured sort of paragraphs, but I think it actually helped me have these bold statements about this project is going to gain a better understanding of the causes of dementia by, and then sort of explaining it dot point wise like that. The biggest and most important part, I guess, is having persons who are impacted or are living with dementia or have lived experiences be at the forefront of your application as you're writing it. So again, I made very bold statements about how I was going to consult with Dementia Australia. I had already made connections with Childhood Dementia Initiative because my project was focused on that. I'd reached out to them to ask for their support in my application and really engaged with their scientific committee initially to kind of see whether my research was sort of aligning with what the Childhood Dementia Initiative would want to fund and also with Dementia Australia. So these are some examples of statements that I made that came straight out of my application. So you can see that was very much aiming to keep carers, persons living with dementia and the general public up to date with what we're doing. And by doing that, by attending community seminars or conferences, and also making the research more accessible. So inviting persons with dementia to understand what we're doing and show them what we're doing essentially. And not discounting the importance of digital platforms as well to really get your research out there to the wider community. Knowledge translation, won't spend too much time on this because I think, we're all pretty good at this, but just making, like Olivier said, don't sort of promise the world. You want to show short and long-term translations that are actually achievable. So I was very much looking at an area of research that's kind of not got a lot of focus at the moment. So I really honed in on that aspect. And then obviously we're all aiming for publications, but discuss how your publications are going to increase awareness of dementia or increase understanding, potentially bring in more funding from other places in the future. Okay, just a few slides on the research proposal itself. I wanted my application research proposal to be memorable. I know that reviewers are looking at so many of them and all of the projects are going to be of a high standard. So for me, I wanted them to remember my application and that what I had highlighted in the online portal was reaffirmed in the research proposal as well. So I made very bold targeted statements really straight up in my application. So above this sort of paragraph I've taken out here, I had the aims and then straight away a very short background followed by this kind of color blocked section where I was like, the project is ultimately going to do this and outline those things. And those aspects that I outlined here were also sort of written in more of a lay terminology in the online portal too. So everything was consistent. So my idea of using text formatting, you know, this might not be popular with a lot of people, but I use text formatting and color blocking to really draw attention to things I wanted the reviewer to be able to go, oh yeah, she's addressed that. A little bit more about the color blocking. So I'm not sure. Yeah, as I said, this is something I like, but might not be for everybody. I color coded my aims and I kept that consistent throughout the application. So this meant that if the reviewer is looking at aim 1 in my graphical abstract where I'm showing visually what the method's going to be, they could also then see that in the budget later on because it was also colored the same. So wherever possible, just make it so that it's visually very attractive, like drawing the reviewer to really key aspects of your application. And I highly recommend having a graphical abstract. My project was quite complex and had quite a lot of layers to it. I knew from the start, if I wanted to get this across, it needed to be simplified, and in a visual format, I found was the best way to do that. Again, just talking about really complex aspects, you know, my project was talking about a very specific region on a chromosome, on a gene that gets deleted. It was just like so complicated. Even now to explain it, I'm like, how do I do this? So I really made a point to sit down and make an infographic that I could hand this flyer out to people and they would go, okay, I'm sort of understanding what your project is about. And this is really important for the reviewers as well, because as Olivia said, they might have a background in dementia research, but maybe not specifically into the more molecular aspects of certain genes or proteins. The budget, I'm going to be completely honest, I didn't spend a lot of time on the budget. It is a very important aspect, but I think with budget, sometimes we have a tendency to sort of overcomplicate it, thinking we have to, you know, throw everything in there. But like Olivier said, if you can justify things, maybe explain that there's already infrastructure in place within your research institute, you can then kind of break down and simplify your budget. So I did this cost per aim, cost per year, with obviously a total cost per project, but you can see it's broken down. Again, that color coding is there. So if again, the reviewer goes, oh, I see she's going to do like CRISPR gene editing in aim 1, let me go back and see what her methodology is, or her outline of her aim. Under this table, I had like very, again, bold statements justifying each of the aims costs per year, but I kept that quite succinct as well. Okay, so yeah, all of this is just my personal experience with the project grant, but number one thing, I guess, start now. They were released this week, so hopefully you've already sort of started your online portal, maybe made a Word document already. It's a super tight turnaround, and having the online portal application being really a quite crucial aspect is important that you spend a lot of time like populating that, but also obviously on your research proposal. I personally spent a lot more time on the online portal aspects because I knew that needed more attention and I wasn't as familiar with that. So the lay terminology, the impact, and involving persons with lived experiences and advocates in your research. And I will say, I think this paid off. I'm really, really proud that the project that I was awarded actually got the Dementia Advocates Award as well, which to me is just so fantastic, and I really appreciate that. Structure your research proposal, make it easy to read and follow, just like your online portal. Obviously, it does need to have scientific context, but make it easy to read and follow for the reviewers. Have non-scientists read it so that they can screen your lay terminology. And finally, probably the most important, write your application with the funder or those who will benefit the most. So persons with lived experiences of dementia at the very forefront of your mind. And yeah, that's all from me. Thank you and best wishes for your application.
Thank you, Fiona. That was a super good presentation, and I think it was very generous of you also to show actually chunks of your full application that people can kind of like look at and try to get an understanding of how to organize their own content as well. We're getting towards the end of the presentations now. We have the last two speakers are actually fellowship recipients, not project recipients, which is another of the schemes that are supported by Dementia Australia. And with that, I would like to invite Suraj Santani. I'm sorry if I'm murdering your name, mate. Who is a postdoctoral research fellow at the CHEVA at the University of New South Wales. And he's going to tell us about his experience applying for the scheme. Thanks, Suraj.
Thank you, Ramon. I'll just get my screen set up here. Can you see that?
All good. Yes.
Great. So welcome everyone to the info session. I was awarded the DAF 2022 fellowship for a program that we had already co-designed and piloted in the past. So it's a randomized control trial for this program to help older adults with cognitive concerns to maintain their social engagement. So I'll tell you a little bit about the journey of this project. So this started in 2019, 2020, when I reached out to the Dementia Australia advocates group and established a couple of contacts and met with them to discuss potential ideas and talk about what are the needs right now for people who are living with dementia or care partners or advocates. And through those discussions, we came up with this research topic, and then we applied for a pilot grant, which we received in 2020 to co-design the intervention through a very structured process, meeting several times, and also then to pilot it. And then based on the pilot data, now we've been awarded the postdoctoral fellowship for the next phase of the study, which is to run the randomized control trial and then also to implement it in the real world. So as we've gone along this process, we've gathered more and more collaborators. So initially it was me and the people with lived experience or carers, and then partnered with Julie Henry, a professor at the University of Queensland, and now in the implementation phase, we're also partnering with Professor Tanya Davison at Silverchain, who provides residential care or in the community care for thousands of people across the country. So what my main message to you is, discuss ideas with people who have lived experience, because what you think might be the problem might not be the problem. Think about what is important to them. So when I spoke to people, they said, okay, there's a lot of loneliness, there's a lot of depression, but what people don't see is there's a loss of confidence with social interactions underlying those things that cause people to withdraw from interactions. So we thought, okay, what can we do about this? And there wasn't really a comprehensive program out there to help people to maintain their engagement in social interactions, to help them with understanding social situations and how to stay in them when they're struggling with either sensory issues or cognitive issues. So what we did is we co-designed this intervention. So we had the advocates group at the beginning who came up with this idea with me, and then we had the co-design group who met every week for a few months to write aspects of this intervention alongside us. And we hired an occupational therapist who's very experienced with working with people with dementia and their carers to facilitate this co-design process. And this is what we came up with. And what we thought we would come up with was very different to what we actually came up with through the co-design process, meeting every week, talking about what's going to work, what's not going to work. So my suggestion to you is don't assume anything, just see what people actually want. So some insights involve people with lived experience across all the stages, whether it's what ideas should I pursue, how should we design this, how should I word the grant application, how should I oversee the project, maybe it's the recruitment flyers, and also once you have results, how can I create a nice infographic, or how can I share the results with the wider community. Identify a genuine gap in the literature where if we think something is really important, might not be important to other people. So think about what's a gap that people actually care about. And it's really important to have pilot data. Like I said, we got the project grant in 2020. We spent the rest of 2020 co-designing the intervention. 2021, we were still running the pilot. So I applied for the fellowship. That year was not successful because I didn't have any results from the pilot yet at that time. So it's really important lesson for me is it's really key to have pilot data when you're applying for a larger project. And it's really important to have an implementation pathway for the real world. So in this case, we were in discussions with various organizations throughout the process about who might be able to roll out this program. And sometimes we think about grants and then we build teams, but I encourage you to do it the other way around. Think about who are the right people you need for your project, and then think about what are the grants you can apply for. Reach out to someone senior for mentorship. I reached out to Professor Louise Mewton at the University of Sydney, who gave me some tips about writing grants. I never written a grant ever in my life. I was a clinical psychologist, come out of clinic, 6 years in the clinical world into a research context where I thought AI was artificial intelligence. So the learning curve for me was very steep. Read lots of example grants, get feedback from peers, from the advocates that you're talking to. And like people have mentioned, it's really important to have a plan B. We were actually going to design an in-person intervention here, but we got the grant in 2020. You know what happened in 2020. So we had to pivot the entire program to be an online program. And that was such a blessing in disguise, because then we could reach people in regional and remote areas, which is how we ended up partnering with Silverchain. So some tips for the various sections. I won't spend a lot of time on this, just for you to read. I'll highlight a couple of things here. For the application, think about how you would explain it to a family member is the way I thought about it. How can it be really, really clear where there's no jargon at all? And how will you involve people with lived experience? So we specifically said, how often will we meet? How long will each meeting be? How will they be reimbursed for their time? How will they continue to oversee the different aspects of the project as it develops? Not even just during the project grant, but even beyond that. Now in the fellowship, we're talking about the RCT, the implementation, and beyond. When you think about your background, start with the aims right at the top. And you can have multiple aims and have different sections for each of the aims. Use subheadings, it really helps. And if you have pilot data, show that. Use a graph. Make it really visual. With the methodology, if you're trying to do something, you have to give a rationale. Do you have a power calculation to show that your study is actually going to find what it sets out to find? How are you going to do the process? Use visuals, talk about all the things people are concerned about, data security and so on. Show that you understand the guidelines. And in terms of the budget and timeline, it's easy to get confused. When the project funds are there, you might think that's per year. It's actually for the entire project. So you have to be really careful in your budget, how you're going to make that last for the entirety of the project. And think about reimbursement for your advisory group, for the various things that would be involved. And finally, in terms of your project team and career progression, don't just talk about how many publications they have, talk about what's the role they will play in the project. For example, will they be mentoring you and showing you a certain technique or helping you with the design? And then when you talk about yourself, talk about your journey, whatever is unique to you. For example, in my case, I'd come from a clinical background, still working as a clinical psychologist and doing research 4 days a week. I've done social interventions in the context of traumatic brain injury, worked with people with dementia. So these were things that I could bring to the project. So my main take-home messages for all of you are: involve people with lived experience throughout all the phases if you can. Identify a genuine need. Make sure you have pilot data if you're going for a fellowship. And also think about implementation in the real world right from the beginning. Right. That's it for me.
Beautiful. Excellent. Thank you so much, Raj. Really good points. And again, it's stressing the need to involve people with lived experience early in the process and highlighting some of the all the topics that all the speakers have talked about. So we are going to move on into the last speaker for the day. Before we move into the questions and answers, I'd like to welcome Professor Lynn Philipson, Principal Research Fellow of the School of Health and Society, Faculty of Social Science at the University of Wollongong. Hello, Lynn. How are you? Very nice to meet you. Thanks for being today with us. The floor is yours. You can start whenever you feel ready.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. It's been excellent to hear from everybody else about all their lessons as well. So I've been asked just to share my tips for people that might be thinking about applying for mid-career fellowship applications. And I'm currently a DCRC, Dementia Australia Research Foundation Mid-Career Fellow. So just a bit of background about me. So my name is Lynn and I'm from the University of Wollongong. And I think it's important to point out that I'm not only a mid-career research fellow, but I've also been a previous recipient of Dementia Australia Research Foundation project grants. And I think that's been a really important learning for anybody who has a goal in the future, even if you're not ready to apply for a postdoctoral fellowship at the moment or a mid-career research fellowship, that learning how to write grants well and thinking about how your grants can build momentum and help you set a bit of a course and a trajectory for your research is really important. So it's never too early to start thinking about your vision and where you're heading. And certainly my experience with the Dementia Australia Research Foundation, I've felt very supported along the way, and it's been really important for me to learn through the applications of getting project grants prior to thinking about applying for a research fellowship. So my current research fellowship is called Communities for Dementia, and the aim of the fellowship is to create new knowledge about community environments and what works to improve well-being for people with dementia and their care partners, and to translate that knowledge into practice in collaboration with the existing dementia-friendly communities program in Australia. So I wanted to share a few tips from my experiences and what's different about a mid-career fellowship as opposed to a postdoctoral fellowship and just applying for a project grant. So mid-career can be a really funny time for people because grant schemes do tend to often focus on early career researchers or on established senior research leaders. So people can get a bit caught in between. So when you're thinking about applying for a mid-career fellowship, I think it's really important to look at the aims that the Dementia Australia Research Foundation have put in there, which is that they want this fellowship to support current researchers to become leaders. They want you to move from research projects to begin to think about articulating a research program. And they're looking for you to show how your proposal is going to not only help you to build your own track record and future competitiveness for grants, but also how it's going to help you to build a team and research networks that will help you to be successful with that program of research. So I think that makes it a bit different to some of the other programs and schemes we've heard about from our other people so far. So if you are looking to apply for one of these things, I think before you think about your proposal, you have to be really clear about what your research vision is. Because if you're going to become a research leader, you need to be really clear about who you are and what you want to lead. You need to really think carefully about crafting a really compelling personal statement that showcases your passion and motivation and your longer term research goals. You need to highlight the evidence of your potential for leadership and the things that you've done along the way that shows that you have the potential to emerge as a research leader. And I think developing a really concise and well-structured narrative, how your proposal actually fits into that vision is really important. And we need to think about our reviewers and engaging them with a narrative. To craft a compelling proposal, I think our previous speakers have talked really clearly about how important it is to have clear objectives and questions and be addressing a significant research topic. I think for mid-career fellowships, it's really important how that idea, though, has scope to be expanded in a future program of research. So it doesn't just have to be a good idea and a compelling idea for this project, but you need to clearly show how it can be built on in your future research to help achieve that vision. So your plan should really be building on your methodological strengths and your track record, and it should show the potential and vision for further development. So really, I would encourage people to be thinking about, how do you move from writing a research project, thinking and conceiving a research project, to defining what a research program in your area will look like. So the proposals should be written defining short-term goals and outputs for your project, but also showing how the project will lay the foundations to help you achieve your long-term research vision. So we need to really be thinking about how we move just from describing outputs from a research project to more longer-term outcomes, how the proposal will help you to build towards those long-term research program outcomes. You've got to demonstrate a strong fit. You need to convince your reviewers that your project needs to be done and that it has scope to be expanded. That there is a need for a research program, not just a project in your area of need, and that you're the right person for them to invest in, to build and lead that program, and that you have the right mentoring and collaborators to be successful. You need to highlight your achievements and experiences in relation to this application, and you really need to tailor your 2-page career summary to align with your proposal and the fellowship objectives. A generic statement won't be enough. So I thought I'd share with you a little bit about my vision and how I articulated that, and how I thought about, how do I build from describing what I would do in a research project to something that actually looks more like a mid-career fellowship proposal. So my vision is to build a network of researchers and communities that can promote social change and inclusion for people with dementia. I have a background as a public health academic, and I have a long track record in engaging in research and action to promote dementia-friendly communities. I have expertise in community-based participatory research methods, and I have a track record already of collaboration on individual projects with researchers, communities, and people with dementia, including evaluating individual dementia-friendly communities projects. And I've been a leader of smaller interdisciplinary dementia research projects. So when I originally started to write this grant, because I was this research proposal, the fellowship, I was familiar with writing research projects. So it was quite clear to me how I could describe that research project. I want to understand what works in dementia-friendly communities to decrease stigma and promote social inclusion. So I'm going to co-design and implement a research and evaluation framework and toolkit, and then we'll identify what we learn and we'll share those learnings for policy and practice. But how does that project lay the foundations for a future research program? So I had to think about how I could show how I was going to use this opportunity to actually build a program around communities for dementia, how I could use this project to engage communities and researchers in Dementia Australia, how I would build a community of practice for dementia-friendly community research and evaluation. We would definitely work with that group to co-design and implement the evaluation framework that was in there, but we needed to move beyond just identifying sharings from this original project to show how this would help us to identify new needs and priorities, and then feed back into an engagement process where we would just keep going around in circles to build this evidence base in the long term. So really thinking about how you move and articulate how you're going to move from your project to a program of research. In relation to this as well, it's from moving from describing project outputs, the new knowledge you'll create, the new resources you'll produce, the academic publications, to how you can push that ahead, how the proposal will help you to achieve longer term goals for translation, for new research, for changes in policy and practice, and the development of new active and collaborative research networks who can all apply for new grants in this area. So you're building not just your own work, but the work of other researchers. So I really want to encourage those who are thinking about mid-career fellows to think first about developing and communicating your research vision to make sure your proposal will lay the foundations to move from research project applications to fellowships that will fund or sustain or help you to build a research program, to think about proposals that will help you build your own track record, as well as a team and network that can support that impact, and make sure you've got the right mentors and collaborators to be successful. Good luck, everybody.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lynn. That was a very good presentation. And I think it really aligns very well the differences between, the career levels and how you apply to different projects versus programs, and how to build that in your application is very, very important. And I do emphasize with being a mid-career researcher in that weird period of transition between early to mid-career, it's a bit of a tricky spot to be in. So it's important to wrap your head around, what it means for your grant applications and how to be successful. So this is it for the presentations today. And now we are just going to be opening the floor for everyone. So I'd like to invite all the speakers to come back into the call and put the cameras on. And we have received some interesting questions while the presentations were undergone. And I also have some of the questions that I have prepared here. So I will gonna be potentially throwing the questions to the floor, and then you guys, if there are any takers that you can, whenever you can just talk about it and take any of the questions, something to think about. I'm gonna try to address this in order. I see that Annette has been answering some of the questions already in terms of compliance. So thank you very much, Annette, for that. So I will not be checking those ones. We do have the first question that we have received had to do with the eligibility criteria for postdocs fellowships. Let's say, so it now changed from 4 years postdoc to 6 years, which is great. Now, do you expect to change it back to 4 years or any other further changes in the coming years? Perhaps this is for you, Annette.
Yeah, so that change came about particularly working with Race Against Dementia, because they run a fellowship program. They advertise it through Alzheimer's Research UK. So their program's an international type of a thing. So the 6 years came about through discussions with them. I don't know if it would get removed back. I mean, I think what we tend to do is review the research landscape and make any tweaks to eligibility criteria based on what's going on in the space. So at this point in time, they're all 6 years, which is nice and consistent with the project grants, and our mid-careers are 10 years.
Excellent for that. Thank you very much. Another question about compliance, it seems. If I have a partial appointment with an NHMRC grant, how should I prepare the fellowship grant? Are there any problems in terms of eligibility?
Yeah, so what I would do is what we've asked in the application booklet is that if you've got any other funding for a particular grant, you should outline that in the budget and confirm where you have other sources. So if you were looking to apply for a postdoctoral fellowship, for example, and you've already got some funding, I think you would need to make it clear that the DARF fellowship would be the primary one and that you've already got some top-up funding.
Excellent. Very clear to you. Thanks, Annette. This is a question for the LIP panelist, actually. So something for you, Jane, and if the CI has LIP experience, for example, caring for a parent with dementia, will this be considered important or relevant to mention in the application as they bring in a valuable perspective? I will say yes, but I would like to hear what you guys think about.
Look, I sometimes people say, oh, because I have that experience of my grandmother having dementia, that they sort of feel that fulfills the criteria for involvement. And I think you have to think about it. The role as a researcher is quite different from the role of the contributor with the lived experience. So yes, of course it's helpful, but most people could probably say that now, that they know somebody with dementia. So it's not sufficient, but it could be helpful. So just be a little bit wary of that. Having said that, though, I mean, there's a whole field of lived experience researchers, particularly in mental health. So, and that is important that they've had the lived experience themselves in the way in which they conduct the research. So it's not irrelevant, but it's not sufficient, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say.
I think they still have to provide, you know, further evidence that they're going to be using people with a lived experience. But I think it is helpful to know that they actually know somebody with dementia. But as I said before, you know, one person, you know, one person. So I know that, and Annette will probably remember too, that we had a proposal that was brilliant, and the person didn't mention anything about knowing anything about dementia or anything, but in the end it came out that the person had actually cared for his grandmother and who had dementia, and that was why he was interested in dementia research, which is a very significant thing to, you know, to think that that's what put him on that road, but wasn't mentioned at all in his research proposal. And yet it was a brilliant proposal, and probably was because it had that in the background. But I mean, you can't brag and say, "Oh, I know 10 people with dementia." That's not what I'm doing. But it's nice to know that perhaps there's some evidence of dementia knowledge.
Absolutely. Another question about, actually, this is about some of the wording, and this is something that we have discussed, Jane, before. Is there a difference between the language of living experience and lived experience? And which term should we use? And I know that this has been recently updated. Yes, it has been. Maybe clarify what's your opinion on all this.
Look, some people are very sensitive about labels and language, and there has been a shift in that people who are currently living with dementia, particularly. I think I've frozen. No,
you're fine. You're good.
Froze temporarily. So for people who are currently living with dementia, and also it's not just in dementia field, it's in other fields as well, feel that being described as someone with lived experience is not really appropriate because they are currently living, they're not dead. It's not the experience in the past. So I think my advice is usually just be sensitive to who you are talking to. Think about what their preferences might be. And sometimes it's appropriate just to say lived or living experience. And that's what I do. Generally, if I'm writing, I'll put lived or living experience, if I'm using that terminology. The same with the, you know, words around carers. Some people don't like to be referred to as carers. They prefer to be referred to as care partners. So I'll often write carers or care partners or carers/care partners. Just so think about your audience and what you think that they might prefer. What do you think?
I asked Dementia Australia about that a while ago, just because, you know, there was a discussion going on in one of the groups, and honestly, it's either or. You know, there's no set rule, and I think it's just being sensitive to the people you're talking to. I mean, I've got a lived experience, even though I'm living with it, with dementia, you know, because I've had it for so long. I
just find I don't use that term very much now because it's become so sensitive. So I always say to people, just say who you mean. So I would write people living with dementia. If you're talking about carers, it's carers of people living with dementia. Just say exactly who you mean rather than get caught up in the jargon. It's easier just to say, you know, the good old PLWD. Oh no, don't do that. No, that's the worst. No. Never turn a person into an acronym. No.
A word of warning for everyone in the call: don't ever use the word consumers, because if that goes through Jane's, the application's not gonna get out. So I'm very specific there.
That's very interesting that actually word has disappeared quite largely from the dementia research space. And it's not used by Dementia Australia. They talk about people impacted by dementia. That's not so in other areas. There's a lot of, especially in Australia, we're still stuck with that language, particularly like cancer research and a lot of other organisations who call themselves consumer organisations, etc., etc. And NHMRC uses it still, which means we're stuck with it. Which shouldn't be, but we are. Yeah. Anyway, thanks, Ryan.
No, good. There's some clarification. So someone asking for a clarification here between the difference between career summary and career progression statement. Any takers this one?
I can just say from my perspective, the career progression statement is specific to the fellowship applications, and that section would outline how your fellowship is actually going to help and progress your career. So it's more specific to your project that you're pitching as part of your fellowship and what it will actually do for your career and your advancement to become a leader in the field and that sort of thing. Whereas the summary is more about just summarizing what your impact is right now.
Right. Someone is asking about the number of investigators that you can have on DARF grants, especially for the project grants. Do you have any advice for narrowing down the investigator team, and what types, mix of people would you look to include?
I don't know if that one's for Olivier or not.
Yeah, I was looking at Olivier as well.
I'm happy to answer that one, because I made the comment about the associate investigators. I'll turn that around and we'll ask, well, who is relevant to your project? And you need to look at this from this angle. What my comment was, don't put the big wigs necessarily on your grant applications if thinking that it will help. It may or it may not. What I'm looking for is really to be able to understand that whoever is listed as an associate investigator will support and benefit your application and your grant project. So relevant skills, relevant lab, relevant collaborations, or anything like that.
Thanks, Olivier. Perhaps this one is for you as well. If someone is interested in looking at projects that are targeting people with non-English speaking backgrounds, would it be then important to highlight how many people living with dementia are from specific language speaking backgrounds?
All right. Again, coming back to my statement about you don't need to tell us about what is dementia. If it's relevant to your projects, yes, please do, by all means. Again, to clarify my statement earlier, is that you don't need to tell us that Alzheimer's disease is a progressive brain disorder characterized by memory problems, etc. So it's more at that very broad level. But certainly, if you feel that having this knowledge of the specific needs of the group that you want to investigate or do your research in, yes, please.
Absolutely. And yet another one for you, Olivier, and this one is actually naming you on the question specifically. Olivier, you suggest to write a late summary at the end. Whereas I've thought about writing it at the start. Although I've been thinking about the project for a long time, please, can you discuss the pros and cons?
Yes, for me, the lay summary is like the abstract in a paper. And I write my abstract in a paper always at the end. So once I know exactly what I'm going to do, what I've done, and what the plan is, and then it's easier to tailor the statement around what you're planning to do. Sometimes if you write the abstract or the lay statement at the beginning, it's not unusual for the project to change as you work on it. So it's just for me to be more efficient with the time that I have.
Excellent.
Jane.
Yeah, can I just
Jane,
add something
sorry.
on that? Can I just make the point that the lay summary is not the same as the abstract? Because I've seen applications where people just plonk their abstract into the lay summary section, and they're quite different, and they have a different focus, and they'll have a different audience because they'll be reviewed by the dementia advocates. So don't be lazy, write a separate lay summary as well as your abstract.
Yeah, which again, you can only do once you've completed your research plan.
Do we have access to the scoring criteria? People asking themselves. Is there any way in which people can access these scoring criteria for their applications?
The criteria is listed in our information for applicants booklet, but I guess they might be referring to the actual school card, which is like Olivia mentioned, it's just 0 to 6 based on how well that section is written. We could look at providing that in future versions of the information for applicants booklet.
Yeah, another person is also asking about whether that scoring criteria for each of the schemes will be available. So this is a couple of questions around the scoring here. Can project grants be used for associate investigators' salaries?
I think it possibly can, but it has to be justified and shown what that person will do. Because I don't know, Olivia might be able to clarify, but you might have an associate investigator who might be another postdoctoral researcher or a research assistant who'll actually be helping with the work. So as long as it's somewhat justified and clearly explain what that salary is, I think that's how you would work around it. But Olivia might be able to provide more details on that one.
No, I agree with that.
Let's move on to the next question now. I'm not sure I understand this one. So what are your tips for proving you have the capability to complete the project whilst de-identifying? And to what degree do you need to de-identify? Is it across the whole application?
Yeah, I get what they're saying about that one. So in our booklet, we've got some tips. And one way you can do it is if you were going to put your name in and say, or one of the team saying Chief Investigator Joe Bloggs is doing X, Y, and Z, what you can do is instead of saying that person's name, just put in square brackets, Chief Investigator A or Associate Investigator 2 or something like that. So that way you can still have your flow of the sentence, but you've de-identified who that person is. And it's not required in every single section. You don't have to de-identify the knowledge translation section because, you know, I figure that you might have to refer to other companies and industries and other partners to show how your work is being translated into the real world. So that section doesn't have to be de-identified. Neither does how you're going to involve advocates in your work. So yeah, it's it's a research proposal, and then I think it's 4 sections of the application. But it's all mentioned in the booklet if you're not sure.
Right. Thanks for clarifying that, Annette.
Mm.
Someone is highlighting the importance of having a backup plan B, which has been emphasized by a few speakers today. I'm interested in how you would go about incorporating this into your application. Will the plan B typically focus on responding to practical issues such as recruitment, etc., or more focus on issues such as how you might pivot if the outcome of the project is not what was hypothesized? So any takers about how to incorporate plan B in the application, strategic perspective point of view? I think Suraj did a very good job of including that in your project and how you were able to redesign part of it. Do you have any tips for applicants about it?
I think you can think of plan B in terms of multiple dimensions. So recruitment obviously is quite important. If you just thinking of one way of recruiting participants, you might not get the number of people that you want. Another way would be, what are the methodologies that you're going to use? Let's say if there's a high risk methodology, is there some sort of backup plan that you're going to have there? For us, it was sort of very important from the beginning to say, if we can't do this in person for whatever reason, then we will pivot to online. So that was helpful for us because then COVID actually struck and we did have to use our plan B. I don't know, in other situations, I think other panelists here have a broader perspective, have read lots of applications, can tell you much more.
Any other takers, Olivier?
Oh, I agree with Suraj. It's a matter of thinking, well, what could go wrong and how can I minimize or mitigate these risks and explain this in the application. So it can be on anything, as Suraj was saying, it would be recruitment, ways of conducting the research or whatever.
Something that we see in grants sometimes is that or something that I would recommend is not to include nested aims. So it's not a good idea to have an aim that depends on the success of the previous aim, because if something goes wrong, then there's like the full kind of like castle of cards goes down. So it's important to, when possible, being able to address the aims of your project concurrently and at the same time, rather than having outcomes depending on the next outcomes and things like that. This is a broad advice that I will give to people applying for grants in general. Someone is asking about, do I need to be an early career researcher to apply for a project grant of the 75K project grant?
As long as you've got up to 6 years post PhD experience, you can apply to and adjusted for career interruptions, you can apply for a project grant.
Someone is asking about the guide that Jane mentioned, that they can find it. Can anyone provide a link?
I'm not sure if it's hosted on a website yet, but perhaps we could email it, provide it to you to email to recipients of people who are on the workshop right now.
Yeah, I had trouble finding the link, and there was a link provided in this webinar yesterday, Annette, which I tried, but it just takes you to the DCRC website, but it didn't.
Yeah, I don't think the booklet's been uploaded on there because I
don't know why
the website's
I can follow that
being
up.
looked at. So yeah, I think you can contact us at the foundation as well, and we can just email it to you.
I think that should be up on the Dementia Australia website.
Yeah, I think that's what we're going to try and do, put that up there.
Along with, and there's a complimentary guidance for people impacted by dementia who are interested in getting involved in research. I'd love to see them much more easily accessible on the Dementia Australia website. But in the meantime, we can forward them to you, Ramon, and people interested, they can get it from you.
Absolutely. Yeah. To be progressed, then we will make sure that the link is available. Someone is asking, I think it's a very interesting question, because there's so many different schemes available. Would it be unfavorable to the panel if I submit applications to both postdoctoral fellowships?
Sorry, was that to submit to a postdoctoral fellowship and a mid-career fellowship?
I guess that is the question. I think the way I read it, I understand that it was if you're planning to, for example, to submit applications for grants and fellowships, whether that will be unfavorable or not. Because my understanding is that you cannot submit same application to both fellowship programs, but you could potentially submit your same application for 2 available postdoctoral fellowships.
Yeah.
Maybe we can address this question of applying for multiple projects, and how will that be regarded by by the committee and the panelists?
I think what Olivia was saying, as long as they're targeted correctly to how long the time frame is for each, then it will be reviewed on its merits.
So there is no eligibility as long as the eligibility is compliant.
Yeah.
There's no issues with that, right?
Yeah. So as long as you're eligible, yeah, you can submit a project grant and a postdoctoral fellowship, for example. Yeah, but just bear in mind that they need to address the criteria in terms of the timeline for those 2 grants and the funding that's available.
I see that some people are adding the link that was missing, apparently. They found it online, so it's on the chat. So thank you very much for who is doing this. Do you need proof of position/salary for the timeline of the project grant? Any takers for this one? Not sure I understand the question very well. For the timelines, I guess that it's asking if you are going to be employed or you're going to be holding a position during the timeline of the process, whether you need to demonstrate that would you be employed for duration of the perspective.
Yeah, so the as the host institution will sign off on the endorsement form, they need to acknowledge that they have the resources to host that person. and that they have a position that will be for the duration of the grant.
So it's obviously necessary to be employed during the duration for compliance.
Yeah, yeah.
It's pilot data essential for an early career postdoctoral fellowship. I think essentially it's a bit of a strong word, but I will let Annette, Olivier.
Well, project grants are sometimes the point where you get the pilot data. So that's the whole point. Yeah. So with our project grants, that it might be a pilot project, and the aim is that if you get that data, you'll be able to then apply to a bigger NHMRC grant and actually, you know, get a lot more money than what we're able to provide. So yeah, absolutely. It's good if you've got it already for the application, but the application itself might be a pilot project.
Next question, it's about the investigator team again. Is it okay to have 3 associate investigators from the larger study that my smaller project is associated with?
Again, I'll make the same comment I made before, is that as long as it's relevant to your actual project, then why not?
Absolutely. Someone is asking, apologize, I attended very late. Whether it's possible to get access to the recording? Yes, the recording will be made available to everyone. If I'm applying for a travel grant for an international conference in Europe and going to visit in a meeting center support program in Europe, am I eligible to apply? I'm not sure I understand this question.
Yeah, as long as you meet other criteria, but yeah, doing those activities would be great.
Is this the first time that the travel grants have been offered by Dementia?
No, they used to be offered, maybe 10 years ago, Jane, I think. Yeah. They used to be the Rosemary Foundation travel grant, and they disappeared for a little while. But yeah, as I mentioned, it's collaborating and getting to know people again is probably a good thing to help with. So they've made a comeback.
Can people apply to travel grants and project grants at the same time?
Yeah,
Successful
yeah.
with the schemes? Okay, we have 3 minutes left, and I want to sort of like wrap up some of the meeting today. I think we sort of like address most of the questions in the live chat. There is still some outstanding issues with the link, but as we said, the link that Jane mentioned will be provided one way or another. Do we have I mean, like a broader question perhaps, Annette, for you? Do we have any idea of what's the success rate of these programs?
Yeah, actually, I will update that on the website, but unfortunately, the success rate might be like 10 to 15%, depending on the grant round that's on offer. Yeah, so they've become highly competitive grants.
They are very competitive, and I think it's important for people to know that the success rate is pretty much in line with the similar programs that the NHMRC or ASE are offering at the national level. So it's still a very competitive process. So that's why we're trying to do our best to kind of like to give you guys an edge in the applications and do this early in the process. Since the grants were announced only a week ago, there is still, I mean, there is as much as time as you can have to prepare your application. So just reinforcing the message of starting early and connecting to the people that are important, you know, to have like higher chances of success.
I'm really excited to see the applications this year. I think we've provided, you know, lots of hints and tips over the last couple of days. So I think there'll be some really good applications this year.
I was gonna use this as a segue to say that I think it was a very good session today, and not the only session that Dementia Australia or different organizations are trying to put together to bring up the success in these kind of applications, and to kind of like explain how to prepare everything from a strategic point of view and checking your compliance and whatnot. It's a bit of like a different team, the one that Dementia Australia is offering, because of the focus and the rightful focus on people with a lived experience. So it's always important to get out there and send that message through. And with that, I would like to, well, first of all, I thank all the panelists today, and they were like incredible, good presentations, great advice. Thank you very much for your time. It was a great session today. We had a lot of fun, and I hope it was useful for the people as well. We had a lot of people actually connecting, with up to 60 at some point, and then will become, as we say, the recording will become available. And with that, thanks everyone, and have a great weekend.